Hi, my name is Noel Bell, and in this podcast I'm chatting with Allan Pimentel. Allan is a jazz drummer and psychotherapist and counsellor for over 25 years, and in the interview we discuss Allan's initial training with CCPE in West London, which recently celebrated 30 years as a Transpersonal training institute. In the interview, Allan refers to this place, meaning CCPE's building in Little Venice, and to Nigel, meaning Nigel Hamilton, who's the director of CCPE. I started the interview by asking Allan how he initially got involved with CCPE in the mid-80s.
I had been accepted. I was very honored to have that because I had no background in the field. I was a jazz musician. I did have a background working with mentally disturbed people. So I had met Nigel in passing. He was one of a couple of places I came for an interview. He didn't seem particularly interested in me. You know, there was kind of, I think, a transpersonal model I may not have fulfilled quite right.
You weren't on an alchemical journey?
Not as far as I know. That could be argued. But and we met, and it was pleasant enough, and I moved on. But I then had I had to sign a contract with Philadelphia Association, and it was going to be a live-in gig. It was living in their housing things, 24 on, 48 off, 24 on, 48 off, 24 on, 48 off, 5 years, and then you're a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. And of course, I was a big Lang fan. I was a huge R.D. Lang fan at the time. I'm still a fan of his up to a point, but I know more about him today than I knew then. So there was a lot of romance around him. There was a huge amount of romance, which fortunately has come to ground now. He was a very gifted therapist and a very troubled human being. It all ended for me when his son was in my foundation class there. And I got to hear about him firsthand and ask some questions, and it was good. The guy was great.
Okay.
The guy was great. He was a graphic designer, his son, and he wanted to find out if he could be a therapist. And he said after 1 year, he said, "I would never do this." He said, "I never got what it was from watching my dad do it." But he said, having been here, he said, "I'm glad I did. This was fantastic, but I would never do it," which is interesting. I went there on the basis of a strange dream I had. What happened was, the date came, I had to sign the contract with the Philadelphia Association. Now, I'm not a big dreamer. I don't dream a lot. And if I do dream, it's often music. But on this particular night, I had the most visually stunning dream. I think one of the most stunning dreams I've ever had in my life. I was in a room with Nigel, who I'd met about a year earlier for like 15, 20 minutes. He hadn't made a huge impression on me, and I know I didn't make much of an impression on him. And in the dream, I can't hear what he's saying. He's talking to me very earnestly about something, and I keep saying, "I can't hear you." And at the same time, behind him, in the corner of a room, and I know this sounds absurd, but there's an angel standing in the corner of the room who is growing exponentially as we're talking. And the angel keeps going and going and going, and his head goes right through the roof. And I'm saying to Nigel, "Excuse me, there's an angel behind you," and his head's just gone through the roof, and the rubble's coming down and everything. And Nigel's going, "Don't pay any attention to that. Listen to what I'm saying." Well, I couldn't hear what he was saying, and I woke up. And I thought, well, that's got to be a sign of something, because I hadn't thought about him at all. And I thought, I ought to call him. That's what I'll do. Before I sign that contract, I'm just going to call him. So I called him on the phone, and he answers the phone. In those days, he did everything. He was the receptionist, cleaner.
The porter.
The porter. Oh, Christ. He did everything, And he slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. And one of the tales I told about him in the book was, one of my fondest memories was him walking out of a session. And at that time, 20 pounds was top whack, And I many of the time I saw him walk out of a session with a client with 20 in his hand and walk in and hand it to the secretary or the milkman. You know what I mean? It's like, it was that real hand to mouth. And so anyway, I called him and I said, "Hello, I don't know if you remember." And he goes, "Yes, I do remember you, but look, I'm really busy. I've got an opening. I've got one opening on this course. I got 3 people calling in this morning within the next hour. I don't want to miss that because I got to go to Johannesburg this evening, or South Africa this evening, and I haven't got any time for chit-chat right now." Right, but absolutely understood. I
Very
said,
clear with his boundaries then.
yeah, that was fine. And I said, totally understood. Would you give me the place on the course? I said spontaneously. That wasn't why I was calling him. It just came out of me. I just, would you give me that place? And he went, yes, I will. I'll see you in January. Goodbye. Put the phone down. And I started in January, and that's how I started here. The course I was in was the first 3-year course. The earlier course, and it was probably more psychology. The original course, I think, was very much spiritually based, a lot of meditation, very little psychology. Tamara, I remember, was my supervisor. What I didn't know is I was only 1 year ahead of her on the course. She and another lovely woman named Roma Jacks, who became a dear friend of mine, wonderful supervisor, and Yuta, I don't remember Yuta's last name, but they were our supervisors. And Jenny Jennings, who worked with Susie Sanders and I in the first year of the group. Asha Quinn, who sang, and I were colleagues. Yeah. We were in that class together. None of the other people from our class are here.
Phil Parkinson? No,
Phil wasn't with us. He came later. Everybody else came later. Okay. Susie Sanders, and within the next couple of years, the rest of them came. So there we were. We're in Notting Hill Gate. It was really rough there. I mean, really rough. Fundamentally black neighborhood, serious drug area. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest drug dealers in London lived immediately across the street, and cabs would drive up literally every 20 minutes, and every now and then a guy would get out and a gun and fall out of his pocket. And it's real drug. And a lot of Rastafarians lived there, a couple of black restaurants and so forth and so on. But then you walk down one more street and you're on the Portobello Road, and all this kind of very hip, trendy restaurants and shit, great. Or you walked up the road to Goulburn Road I'm Portuguese, and of course that's Portuguese neighborhood there, so I'd do that, and you could go shopping. I bought all my clothes there. It's just like a little world of its own. Yeah. Very dangerous at night. I had 2 attempted muggings while I was there. Got out of both of them, luckily. In one, I hit a guy so hard, they caught him right away because he had to go to the hospital, and they called me and said,
is that him?
I'd broken his nose and his teeth. Oh, right. And they put 2 and 2 together, and they got him. The other guy they never got. Right. So it was the Wild West, and great fun, huge fun. Not as, what's the word, codified as it is today. It was wild. It was crazy, Yeah. And we did really well from the very start, I think. I had no plans to be a psychotherapist, though. That wasn't in my plan. My plan was I was killing time. I thought I was going home. I was here, my then wife was an investment banker, and I thought we would put our time in and I'd go home. But I was studying psychology because it interested me and so forth. Well, I never did go home. Things took certain turns, and about 3 or 4 years later, I started doing a bit of supervision. I always did the weekends for them. At one time, I did all the weekends. For even all 4 years, I did all the weekends, which is a lot of weekends. Then I went down to 3, and then it was 2, and then now I don't do any at all. I haven't done any weekends in 5, 6 years, I think. I supervised all the various years. I got out of that slowly. I think it was in 95. Then we bought another house over there. Or not we, Nigel bought another house. I think it was 20 McGregor Road, if I'm not mistaken. Which is where I met one of my wives. She was living in the basement, renting from Nigel. Then in 95, of course, we came here. And everything changed then, I think. The thing I loved about the old place was, among other things, there were no chairs there. And I do mean no chairs. There wasn't a chair in the place that I can remember. The secretary had one. We sat on the floor with our clients. I think it was actually much better. When my clients moved over here with me, it took them years to get used to chairs. They couldn't. And to this day, I'd rather sit on the floor, actually. It's better energetically, I think, when you're dealing with people. Then everything started to get kind of serious and big when we came here. More business, more students, more laws, more of everything. And of course, it went from being this little family concern where we all knew each other, and it was hand to mouth, to this, which is reasonably sophisticated relative to what we were doing. This is like technical heaven. I mean, in those days, I think I said in the thing, we had a stack of filing. We didn't even have a filing cabinet. Like a letter would come in, and you'd read it, and you'd put it on the stack on the desk. And then if you needed to refer back to it or anything, you'd go, where's that letter for, And the secretary would go, I think it came in October. And then you could go through all the October stuff until you found it. It was like that. It was cool. It was very cool.
Organized chaos.
Yeah. And it all worked. Part of what I did, and Roma Jacks did, was we had a hell of a lot to do with getting placements, because we were both kind of outgoing and sociable and liked talking to people, and which many psychotherapists, aren't. And so I often did the charm work. Somebody over for a cup of tea and sell them on a placement, and Roma did the same. And a lot of the initial placements we did ourselves, actually got started and then got people in behind us and stuff like that. The Caravan I worked at very early and ran that for about 7 years.
I was going to say, because you were the coordinator of the Caravan.
I was, but the way it's run now, I mean, it's run like a business. Then it was run like a freewheeling jam session arrangement, which I liked very much, and it was very productive, and we did really well. And our numbers we drew were huge, and it attracted people to the course. And then I moved down to St. Marylebone Church. I got everybody in there. And there were other places. I can't mind. I worked for Mind for quite a while. And wherever I'd go, I'd get some more people in, and then move on and do it again somewhere.
You're listening to an interview with Allan Pimentel with me, Noel Bell.
Then I, in around 1991, I went on a big ego trip. I wanted to work in Oxford, not for any reason, but the fact it was Oxford, if you get my drift. I'd been there once, and I thought that would be cool to work in Oxford. It's kind of posh and intellectual.
Has a certain panache.
Yeah, it has a certain, and it certainly did. It certainly did. I went up with one of my colleagues, Alan Taylor, and we tried to get something started, and it didn't fly. So I came back. He stayed for a while. He was supposed to actually split the clients with me, which he didn't do, and that really pissed me off. And so I came back, and he bombed out about 6 months later and had no clients. He came back. The minute he came back, I went back and got started again. And I got a job in a center there. And I had a client, which I traveled all the way to Oxford to see, because that's how you get things started. And then fate dealt a wonderful hand. At the center I worked in was all analysts and me. I was one transpersonal guy and all analysts. And this woman walks in, and she's wearing a fur coat, dark glasses, boots, and books for a session. She comes in, and she doesn't sit down, and she's looking at me, and she goes, I'm going to ask you one question. She goes, if you tell me I'm being controlling, I'm going to walk out. I said, you're being controlling. And she laughed, thought that was really funny. She said, no, I'm serious. She said, I've had 15 years of therapy, and but I want to ask a question. I said, what if I don't know the answer? She said, you'll know the answer. And I thought, okay. I said, give me my 35 pounds now. So she goes, oh, okay, understood. Gives me 35 quid. I go, what's the question? She goes, should I cut my hair? And I went, are you serious? She goes, yes. I said, yes, you should. She says, why? All of a sudden, she's taking a front, I said, well, here's why I think. She was Jewish and very, very good looking. And those huge manes of dark hair, some Jewish women. And when she would talk, sometimes drop her chin, hair would fall down, cover her face up. I said, I think you ought to cut your hair about shoulder length, because you got a nice face, and then if you dropped your chin, the hair wouldn't block your face. All right, she says. Fair enough. And she sits down, and we start to talk. And as fate would have it, she had just been left by a jazz musician, had dumped her. He dumped her because she wouldn't marry him. He wasn't Jewish. I had met him in a nightclub 3 nights earlier. And I liked his playing so much, I went up, introduced myself to him as you do. How you doing? Blah, 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 blah. And so, of course, I'd met him. So I told her this. I said, I've met the guy. Yeah, I do know how. And she tells me how she did it. She actually was not going to marry him, and he wanted to get married. Well, fair enough. So the next week she comes in, and she never took her fur coat off either, or her dark glasses. Next week she comes in, and she goes, I want to ask you one more question. If you say I'm being controlling, I'm going to leave. And it's getting to be like a comedy act now, and I go, fine, give me the 35 quid. I'll do my best. She takes off her fur coat. She's wearing an aerobics outfit with knickers on the outside. And she's got a fantastic body. Got an unbelievable body. And she goes, have I got a good body? And I said, you have an excellent body. I think you've worked really hard to get that. Do you work out every day? Why, yes, she said. How clever of you. You're quite right, I do. Thank you. And she sat down and we carried on. She was with me for 3.5 years. She sent me 37 clients. She made me there. She taught drama at Oxford. And she made me. Everywhere she went, talking about me. I was packed out. It took me, once I decided I wanted to leave, it took me a year to get out of there.
Listening to your lectures as I have, I've always been struck. I'm going to draw the analogy of William James, who talked about the power of biography and storytelling helps reveal.
Agreed.
Stories have always been a part of how you've imparted knowledge. I just wondered, where did that come from? Was that a family history?
Yes, indeed. My father, where the average kid maybe has fairy tales read to them at night, my father read Greek and Roman myths to me. That was my entree into that world. And he liked to discuss them and what they meant and stuff like that. So I love a good story. Sadly, a lot of people don't like stories. A very significant number of people don't like stories. I'll get a lot of stick at that end. Because it's very interesting. My father told me, I totally agree with this, and it probably sounds a bit defensive, but my father said, you always know inferior people. They can't bear stories or anecdotes. It's a sign of the inferior mind. Because for a number of people, if I tell a story, they're not paying attention to the story. They're sizing me up somehow, like it's about me. And it's not about me. Susie Sanders was one of the first people, I think it's why we're such good friends, who understood that perfectly. She said, I know perfectly well it's nothing about you when you tell those stories. She said, you have a point you're trying to make, and you always make it. But the point is often not for everybody who's sitting in the room. Mostly now I've stopped lecturing for that very reason, and I lecture in places where storytelling and mythology and the like are appreciated and get a lot better paid, I might add.
I'd like to take you back to, you mentioned Portuguese background.
Indeed.
But the listeners will hear an American accent?
I'm from San Francisco, or I'm from Berkeley, California, actually is where I'm from. But all of my grandparents, all of them, are from the same island in the Azores, a place called Flores, which means flowers.
You're listening to an interview with Allan Pimentel, with me, Noel Bell. Playing jazz, playing the drums, and then Esalen. How did that come about?
How it came about was, there's that funny thing Andy Warhol says, isn't it? The day's coming when everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. Yeah. Which is, I think, just about true now. But I did that movie with Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen discovered me in a nightclub. He was thinking about Bullet. He wanted me to do the score, actually. That was our first thing. But the company who put the money up, I was an unknown. Nobody had heard of me except local people, so I was a complete unknown. So they hired a well-known guy to do it. But because of being in the film, of course, I was able then to have my own band, pretty much keep them busy. And Esalen offered me what was the equivalent of a paid vacation. It was like 2 weeks at Esalen, which is probably about the nicest place in California you can stay. All expenses paid. Could bring our families and kids. Hot tubs, good food, free alcohol, and nice weather on the 49-mile drive, near Carmel, Monterey. And so I was the artist in residence, and all I had to do was me and my band played for a 1-hour concert every night before dinner for 2 weeks for our keep.
And what year are we talking about?
Roughly 65, 66.
Okay.
Roughly. Haven't got it etched in my mind. But as fate would have it, I mean, it just goes to show you. Didn't mean a thing to me, to be perfectly honest, but it was relatively interesting. The other people who were there were Carl Rogers, Eric Byrne, Fritz Perls, Stan Grof, Rollo May, and some other people whose names I've forgotten. And their gig was kind of a convention center, and at night they gathered together and had heated discussions about their various schools of therapy and all that stuff. And we would go and listen we didn't know anything about psychology and didn't care, but they were interesting guys, and we kind of we were all very fond of Fritz Perls, actually, so we'd generally tag around with him a bit.
Larger than life?
Well, it's hard to describe him. He was really himself.
So he didn't have good hearing, did he?
Not amazing, but he was good enough. He was a very, very good listener, by the way, and very damn clever therapist. He was very much himself. He wouldn't do any false self stuff, like, if he didn't like you, just tell you so. This guy don't fucking like you. He would. What? He would. And
he was almost like Encounter, the way Encounter groups would be.
Yeah. But of course, Carl Rogers was the father of Encounter groups. He'd done them at Esalen already before. But quite right. And so those guys were there, which is ironic in passing. Another irony is that my first mother-in-law was Irvin Yalom's secretary.
Yes.
Which is an irony. And that's just, God, how weird is that? I remember calling my mother-in-law when I found this out. I mean, I put 2 and 2 together. I read a book by Irvin Yalom, and it said he works at Stanford University in the medical center. I goes, my ex-mother-in-law works there. We're good friends. I called her on the phone. I go, Mom, do you know Irvin Yalom? She goes, I don't fucking want to talk about it. I don't like him. She goes, he has to see people here as a part of his professorship. Somebody will go into his office and stay for 2.5 hours, and he lets people pile up out in the waiting room. And they're all going, where's Irv? And she'll knock on the door, and he'll go, leave me alone, I'm busy. Then the next person will go in, 5 minutes later they walk out because Irv has decided it's too boring that day and nothing's happening. It's like that. So she didn't speak terribly highly of him. I never met him, though. But I did meet Carl Rogers, Eric Byrne, who I liked, but he was kind of, I don't know what to say, straight up and down.
But Eric Byrne was a psychiatrist, wasn't he?
Yeah.
There's an interesting YouTube clip where there's an American NBC TV special that is in a car with him on that drive to his house in Carmel.
Right.
Was there any warmth around him?
Yeah, but he was direct, straightforward, businesslike, honest, reasonably well-mannered, liked to drink. I can't fault him. We liked Fritz Perls. He was a little bit wild and crazy, not above doing some drugs, into women. A bad boy, he was a bad boy. He was.
Embraced his shadow.
Yeah. Although he wouldn't have talked about it that way. He told me a couple of very interesting facts about him. One that, how knowledgeable he was about the body. He had learned all of that because he'd gone to acting school, and he had studied the classic Greek and Roman drama in Germany as a kid. That was his first. He wanted to be an actor. I mean, you can kind of see with his looks that wasn't going to happen. The guy was not great looking. He was a little gnomish guy, And but everybody in the band loved him. I do remember that. The women in the band were just crazy about him. He didn't flirt, or didn't act inappropriately or anything, but he was just like himself, you know. You could take it or you could leave it. He didn't care.
So, did Esalen, that must have had a big impact on your decision then to study?
No, none at all. I never had a plan to be a therapist ever. It was never part of my plan. It was an accident. I came to this country. I went to work playing music.
And what year are we talking now? Is that
86.
Right. Oh, right. So
I went to work playing music. The pay was so bad, I told my wife, I'll never make a decent living here, the rate I'm going. First night out, I came home 28 pounds poorer than I left. And I could see, because they're paying guys like 40 quid, 50 quid. Even today, pub pays around 50, 60 quid, you know. I can't live on that. I couldn't run, piss up at a brewery, as they say. You know?
Yeah.
So I had been in therapy a lot, though. My interest came, I was a client for years before, and I had been in Gestalt therapy group in the United States. And then I came to this country and I was out of sheer boredom because I knew Bern. There was a TA group running near my house, which I joined, which I stayed with for a hell of a long time, about 5 years. But that stimulated my interest. And how I got into it was quite different. I was in individual therapy as well. I've had 18 years of therapy in my life. And I was in a TA group, and then that therapist, I enrolled with her for private therapy, and I was with her for about 5 years, and I haven't got my time straight, but I'd been with her for quite a while. One day I guessed what she was going to say to me. I burst out laughing, and she said, "What are you laughing about?" And I said, "You're going to say this, aren't you?" And she said, "I was going to say that." And she said, "You know, if you know what I'm going to say, have you ever thought of being a therapist yourself?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, why don't you?" I went, "Oh, okay." You know, this kind of big, generally agreeable guy, and enrolled here. And I thought I'll do a year because I'll probably be going home. But it's interesting. It didn't catch my interest, and I liked it. Then I did the year, and that was good. And then we were staying longer, so I went, I'll do another year. And that was fun. And then did the third year. And then, of course, the third year, I had full practice. When I graduated, I was seeing easily 20, 25 people a week. Easily. I was making a living by the time I left. I mean, not a big living, because those were still the day of 8 and 10 pound clients, you know. But I made a living, and then the rest, as they say, is history. It just went up and up and up and up, you know.
You're listening to an interview with Allan Pimentel with me, Noel Bell. What attracted you, though, to the spiritual component to the training?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had, of course, my background's Catholic, which on par I reject. I have some very serious misgivings about the Catholic religion. In fact, I went to Catholic school. Had the most amazing experience on my first day in Catholic school. Because, you know, they start to brainwash you straight away. They go to work on you. They have you memorizing what are called catechisms, which are books with questions and answers and shit. You know, but anyway, they send us in for our first brainwashing with a priest. I'm like 6. And the guy starts running his mouth, and I'm sitting there thinking, he's just talking shit, I was thinking. All of a sudden, a really loud voice in my head that sounded like a very old man. It wasn't my voice or any voice I knew. It said, "Do not listen to this. None of it's true." And I didn't, but I went to Catholic school. I just did what I was told. Roughly speaking, stayed out of trouble, got out. But my spiritual interests have always been Buddhism.
Right.
Always.
But do you believe in the concept of soul?
Yes, absolutely.
And the soul journey?
In which sense are you talking?
Soul incarnating,
Mm-hmm.
and gets impressed upon,
Mm-hmm.
and then learns to adapt through earth planes.
Yeah.
I was speaking recently to Professor Windy Dryden.
Oh, yeah.
Who went, he just doesn't buy any of that.
I'm sure it doesn't.
Doesn't even, when he reads Young, he switches off.
Yes.
So we're kind of, CCPE are kind of, we're out on a limb, really, in one way, theoretically, in that sense.
Yeah, but I don't think there's much that's taught here that Jung wouldn't have backed.
Sure, but then if we
And look where Jungian stuff is today.
But if we went into the lecture at Tavistock, or Regent's College, or even maybe Metanoia.
I have lectured in places like that.
And the alchemical...
I haven't been able to say everything I want to say, but my experience, and I've been lecturing a lot lately, but not here, but taking some of my own knowledge and acquired knowledge of the things that I agree with from here out, I've found a very ready, willing, and accepting audience.
Yeah.
I just think the time is right.
Well, you mentioned Rollo May, and
yeah.
I've recently listened to a podcast of his, and he was talking about the end of an age that you get, that everyone's a therapist. I mean, the milkman becomes a therapist. And he traces modern European history back to, the Renaissance. Yeah. And then there was no therapists. There was authors, there were painters, sculptors.
I don't agree. I think there have always been therapists, but they were under other guises.
Right.
They were often, I think, of the religious cloth. They were priests or women acolytes that one could talk to when one had a problem.
So there were different roles and different terms.
Yeah.
Do you think
shamans? Yeah. I mean, to me, psychotherapy is at its best when it's really rolling and really happening, is like shamanism. It can't be explained by rational, because the cure, psychological cure, happens irrationally. It's not a rational act, in my view.
Because when we chatted about the Caravans celebration 2 years ago, you were making the point that transpersonal psychotherapy is not actually the new kid on the block.
I think
it goes back to the 15th century.
It goes back earlier. Much farther. It goes back to the beginning of time, in my view. There were always spiritual people. There are always shamans. There are always wise people. No, all transpersonal psychology is, in my humble view, is a packaging. My father used to say, there is nothing new under the sun. There's only repackaging. And I think he's quite right. On par, there's been so little. There haven't been any developments in psychology in the last 10 years that I know about. Probably even longer than that. Except for, the transpersonal, new kid on the block, blah, blah, blah. Well, I just think that's nonsense. That's the uninformed mind. Transpersonal psychology has been here since the dawn of mankind, in my view. I think that it includes astrology and numerology, out-of-body experience, ritual drug use. Oh my God, you name it. You name it.
Are you the same person in the consulting room as you seeing a client as you are outside?
I'm the same everywhere. I think that sounds like a pretty presumptuous thing to say, but enough people have told me I am. They've always said to me, you're no different. Like if you're here, you're there, you're playing music, you're like this. If you're doing therapy, you're like this. If you're at home, you're like this. My wife says, and she'd be the first one to say, she goes, you're always the same. She went, do you do this when you talk to people? I went, I do, actually. Yeah.
What do you draw on as a model? Do you just let the therapy flow, or do you have at the back of your mind some sort of model about where the therapy is going? I mean, do you think in terms of an alchemical journey, or do you think in terms of phases of development?
I have no problems with the alchemical model, and it's hugely interesting, but I have a simpler view, kind of more back toward Jung, which is I simply have in my mind that this person I'm talking to was built, they're one-offs, there's only one of them, there's not going to be another one, There hasn't been another one with a specific makeup, and the reason they're in whatever problem they're in is because they've gotten too far away from their specific makeup, and anything I can do to help them get back to the real self. It sounds so grandiose, but
sure.
Anything that encourages them to be themselves and to do what they were built for. And they've got a lot of room to move. It isn't like prescriptive and you got to be a brain surgeon. But to get back in touch with that true divine inheritance, which I very much believe in, that gift they brought in that's unique to them. How far off the beam has this person gotten? Is there a way I can get him back on the beam?
I know we don't have a great deal amount of time, but there was a couple of instances I just wanted to ask you about. How you dealt with angry clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the storytelling about the client who used to throw the money at you.
Yeah.
You seem to be able to demonstrate a capacity to hold that level of anger.
Yes, I can.
Do you think that's a skill, or is that a learned thing? Is that like an intuitive?
I think it's a combination of things. My background, and don't think I'm complaining about, I'm very proud of my background, but it's an unusual one. I was born in a black neighborhood. I've always thought there's a part of me that's black. It generally comes out in music more than any other place. There's something, the black temperament in me, because those are the guys I grew up with.
And you like wearing black?
Yeah. That's another story. It has nothing to do with that. This is Robert De Niro and Al Pacino.
Okay.
I saw them once in New York having lunch, and they were both dressed like this, and I went, that's cool. Also, it was very good if you in fact spill food on yourself. It's a good color. But I grew up in a circumstance where there were a lot of angry people, and one had to learn how to defend themselves physically, take care of themselves. And if somebody needed to fight, my father, one of his wonderful motives, my father was a boxer, among other things. And when he was teaching me boxing, he went, you don't have to win, you only have to hurt them on your way down. And they won't bother you again, which proved to be absolutely God's truth. But no, angry people don't upset me, but it's funny, there was something a supervisor said to me years ago that sealed it for me. I was talking to her about an angry client, and she said, have you ever stopped to think about the pain it takes to fuel something like that? And I said, I haven't, but I'm going to. And I always think about that. So when I think somebody's really pissed off, I'm thinking, God, how crap must this be for them to have to do it this way? Yeah. That must hurt. That must hurt. And I can have a lot of sympathy for that, of course.
Which single book has most inspired you and why?
If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. Sheldon Kopp. I was a big fan of his. Because I thought he's the only person I read. Well, I'll have to give some of it to Lang, too. I did like Lang very much. Lang was kind of in a class all by himself, though. The guy was a genius. The guy was a genius. There's no two ways about it. In intellectual terms, he was a giant. Anthony Lunt told me about Lang because he had been his client. He said he never found a book Lang hadn't read and couldn't talk about for at least 3 hours in huge detail and be absolutely spot on the money. Lang likened himself to Nietzsche, which is interesting. Lang said, I put myself at Nietzsche's level. I've got that mind. And he had Nietzsche's rudeness and general way of misbehaving, too. Nietzsche was not your favorite party goer. So, but Sheldon Kopp, I always liked him because everything he did, it just seemed so human. His responses and his ways of looking at things. And I always admired that book called If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. It's about a lot of different things. There's no theoretical basis to it. It's almost more like some of Yalom's later tales. In fact, I'm sure Yalom had read If You Meet the Buddha on the Road and was impressed by it. He had to be. because the tales have a certain ring that are quite similar.
Everyone seems to have influences when you keep looking back.
Yeah. I do like Allan very much. I like his writing. I'd say my heroes would be Kopp, Lang, Allan. So guys that are kind of leaning toward the existential thing.
Not Eric Byrne.
I very much appreciate what he did. I very much, don't mistake me. I think it's a wonderful model. It's a very useful model. It can be used in many, many ways, very creatively, and I use it. But I don't read him today, or I don't refer back to him. I've kind of got it in my head, and I've assimilated it. So nothing against him.
That's a bit like how I feel about Bowlby. Secure base, critical, but you embody it and then it's dealt with, or you take it in and then it's kind of done.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, it's been great, man.
For more podcasts on psychotherapy, visit noelbell.net/podcasts.